Right, so I'm going to do this differently. Instead of doing an audio over slides on this one, I'm going to do a separate little lecture, and then I'll also send the slides, and you can sort of watch the slides while I do the lecture. I'm limited by how much I can put on a audio lecture, how much I can upload to Moodle. So these audio lectures on the PowerPoint slides are quite limited. So I'm going to try this. Anyway, so I'll mention the title of each slide as I go along. So we're on James Cook and the explorer, and he'll sort of, this will put together hopefully everything we've been talking about with the Pacific. So let's go to my title slide is exploration. Let's go to my second slide. And what we have here is Captain James Kirk. Not Captain James Cook, Kirk. And I just found this as a fascinating little... I've never read anything that says there's actually a link to Star Trek and Captain James Cook, besides the alliteration on the name. But you think about it, if you remember, the voyages of exploration in the 18th century were, Navy ships, Navy captains flying the flag, but carrying scientists and doing missions of exploration and research and mapping. Well, Star Trek's the same thing. It's a Federation starship, Captain Kirk of the, Starfleet, right? It's a military ship, but its mission, its 4-year mission, right, is to explore new places, to go where no man has gone before, and do exploration and mapping and so forth. So Star Trek, at least the original series, is Captain Cook and the 18th century put into a optimistic future scenario. So I thought that a fascinating link. So let's go to Captain James Cook. So I'll go to the next slide. This slide gives you basically his background. And I'll just very quickly do this. He was born the son of a farmer in Yorkshire, up in northeastern England. Beautiful country up in Yorkshire. Okay, son of a farmer, right? And in 1745, as a young man, he was apprenticed to a shopkeeper in Whitby. And Whitby's a fishing village, a small port on the coast of Yorkshire. It's a beautiful place. There's a gorgeous ruin of a medieval monastery right above it. Beautiful place. A shopkeeper. A year later, he runs away. He says, I'm going to sea. He runs away to see the classic romantic story and joins the merchant marine. He goes on merchant ships and starts out as an apprentice and then becomes a mate, which is a sort of a petty officer. Okay. Sailing merchant ships mostly in the North Sea, in the sea between England and Europe. And then in 1755, right at the beginning of what looks like is shaping up into becoming the 7 Years' War, he joins the Navy, volunteers, as they're building up, ramping up, as a volunteer seaman. So this is not your traditional trajectory. This is not some... go ahead and close the door, Michelle.
Yeah.
Thank you. Your normal trajectory where a middle class or something joins the Navy as a lieutenant officer and moves up from there. Actually starts as a midshipman and then becomes a lieutenant and moves up that way. This is a guy with just basic background, apprenticeship, merchant marine, good sailor, Navy. Very different, very different. So during the 7 Years' War, he serves mostly in Canada. The Of course, in North America, it's called the French and Indian War because that's the enemies in North America. And he participates in the campaign of taking the army down the St. Lawrence River to take the capital of French Canada, Quebec. And his navigation and mapping skills stand out. It's because of him that they can get this huge fleet with all these ships down the St. Lawrence and to Quebec, and they're able to get the army off and capture the city and capture French Canada. So he's recognized. Because of that, that'll sort of further his career. There is a brief break in 1762 towards the end of the war. The war actually finished in 63. He goes home and marries Elizabeth Batt. She's the daughter of an innkeeper. And they will have 6 children. Despite all his voyaging around the world, they managed to have 6 children. Anyway, 1763 to 1766, he's back in, and his job is to map the coast of Canada more accurately, especially Newfoundland, and he does an amazing job charting the coastline of Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence and that territory, which is going to earn him the job of the scientific voyage that we'll take to the next slide, which will be, if I press the right button on the right computer, right, the first circumnavigation. Circumnavigation means sailing around the world. Navigate, circumference, right? And what's going on here is it's a Pacific exploration voyage following some of the earlier ones I had briefly mentioned before. Go to these islands and look at these cultures and do some more mapping. The main job, though, is there is a transit of Venus across the sun that is predicted. And so what they're trying to do is get astronomical observations from different parts of the world so that you can more accurately, right, if you're here and then you're triangulating up to there's Venus, you can get a better measurement from the angles of the distance of the Earth from the sun and stuff like that. So he's taking astronomers to do the measurements and also naturalists to explore the plants and animals of these islands. Goes on a converted merchant ship, HMS Endeavour. It is brought into the Royal Navy. They put some guns on it, but is a converted merchant ship equipped to carry a bunch of scientists, their gear, and whatever specimens they gather. One of the really important things that Cook adopts quickly and that they're learning very quickly at this period is how to prevent illness on voyages. These long voyages had lost a lot of people due to malnutrition, especially a disease called scurvy. Some of these 18th century voyages are figuring out how do we prevent this. And what you really need are fresh fruits, especially citrus fruits, and fresh vegetables. And so you stock up with those, and then anytime you stop somewhere, you try and restock with fruits and vegetables. The diet had been heavy meat and breads, because you can salt meat or dry meat and so forth, and bread you can just make from flour when you're ready. It's hard to keep fresh fruits and vegetables, but they turn out they're necessary to prevent scurvy and other illnesses. So he's careful to load up on those. And he's rarely, if ever, going to lose a man on these trips due to malnutrition. And it's going to sort of lead to the British Navy and British Merchant Marine focusing on that, especially lime juice. They'll often mix lime juice with rum every day. Good mix, okay? So they go to Tahiti, island in the South Pacific, and do their observations. And he takes on a Polynesian navigator, a guy with good mana, right? He's a navigator named Tupaia. And he's going to help translate and navigate around the region. Okay, they're recognizing the amazing skill of these. It's also fascinating that, and we've seen that right in the Americas and elsewhere, that the people the Europeans encounters, they become translators. They learn the European language much more quickly than the Europeans learn the native language. Of course, part of that is European arrogance, but it's sort of interesting. You need these people as navigators. You need them as translators. They have the skill and intelligence. And so he, once the observations are done, then Cook heads over towards New Zealand and Australia, and he's going to try. These have been encountered on some voyages, but no one's really sure what's there. Is it just some more islands? Is it a bloody great big continent? What is it? He circumnavigates New Zealand, at which point, by the way, he's at first encountering the Maori, which is this extremely sophisticated, warlike Polynesian culture who are on New Zealand. And in the book, if you've got his book, look up the Maori and look up New Zealand and see these encounters. Very complex, sort of who's threatening, who's bluffing, who wants peace, who wants violence. How do you encounter and deal with these two cultures? Is some of these early meetings are sort of fascinating, and looking at his journal, you get some really good sort of cultural mixes there. It's worth looking at. Circumnavigates New Zealand, so he figures out that it's these two islands, and then goes to the east coast of Australia and maps the Great Barrier Reef, a huge bay called Botany Bay because they discover 800 brand new species of plants just in this one bay, as well as animals and so forth. So he more mapping, more botany in Australia. They actually hit, when they're navigating the Great Barrier Reef, they actually hit the reef and have to go ashore and repair the ship. It takes about 2 months. Then they stop in Batavia, which is the Dutch capital of the Old Spice Islands. In Batavia, that's where everybody gets sick. Batavia is built in a swamp in a jungle, and lots of people get sick, including Tupaia. And then he goes home. The result of this circumnavigation, by the way, he goes home through the Indian Ocean, Atlantic, and we've got that. The observations of Venus, moderately successful. It wasn't as precise enough as they'd liked, but they bring home 2,500 specimens of plants and animals, including 800 from Botany Bay. And also New Zealand coast has been mapped, and a big chunk of Australia and the Barrier Reef have been mapped. So a successful voyage, including some of the earliest encounters with the Maori. If you jump to the slide after that, it says first voyage, and is a map of his route, going to the Pacific to Tahiti, New Zealand, parts of Australia, and then home. I'll go to the next slide. And his first trip was so successful, Cook gets sent again on a second circumnavigation. Doing one circumnavigation, like, puts you in the history books from the 16th through 18th century. Doing one, he's on his second, because he's that successful. He was only home for 12 months. And then he's sent out again on 2-ship voyage, HMS Resolution and HMS Adventure, again converted merchant ships, very useful for scientific exploration. And again, what we're doing here, this is an epic voyage. There's two goals. One is sort of technical. It's to try to test what's called the K1 chronometer, which is a clock which is designed to withstand the arduous passage of sailing at sea. When you're on a ship, right, there's movement, there's massive variations in humidity and temperature, there's salt air. Clocks don't run very well. And you need a clock. You set the clock for 12 o'clock noon in London. And then you keep that clock running at exactly that time for the whole voyage. Because what you do is, when I'm, say, in the Pacific and I'm doing an observation of the sun at noon, local time, right up there. Okay, it's noon local time. So there's the sun. I look at the clock that I brought from London, the chronometer, and if it's been working right and it's staying exactly accurate, despite all the conditions, then it might be, 11 hours off. So I know I'm 11 hours away from London. And those 11 hours are so many lines of longitude and so many miles. And I can actually map longitude, because they've not been able to map longitude. You can map latitude by sun and moon and stars as they up in different parts of the horizon. And so navigating was always been, go to the line of latitude you want and then sail across that latitude to get to your point. Once you need clock, you need to know how far off a point you are to measure the distance around the circumference by time, like 24,000 miles, 24 hours, right? And then now you can do where I am in longitude. So now I don't need to just go sail down here and then sail over there. I'm like, okay, I can follow longitude and latitude, and much more accurate. This chronometer will be tested on the voyage and it will prove successful. The other really important part of this voyage is there's a theory. If you look at a map, the vast majority of land of the planet is in the northern hemisphere. There is a theory that there is a Terra Australis, the great southern continent. Terra Australis. Australia has proven not to be. Australia's just proved to be a small continent. There's got to be a great southern continent that gives you equal landmass, north and southern hemisphere. They're thinking it's way at the bottom. No one's been that far south. So his main job is to find Terra Australis. Go south, stay south. Sail the roaring 40s. Remember the roaring 40s from our way back, our earlier maps of the Pacific? Right below 40 degrees latitude, the wind just goes around and around and around, and it's just high winds and storms and waves, and as we're going to find out, lots of ice. So his job is to find something. It's an epic voyage. And essentially, if you look at the slide, right, he's gone for 4 years. Every southern summer, he's down in the Southern Ocean looking for Terra Australis. And then in the southern winter, he goes back up, and for example, in 1773, he winters in New Zealand and Tahiti, where he'd made previous connections and links. And again, use his book to look at these interactions. Back to the Southern Ocean, 1774, winters in New Zealand, Tonga and Tahiti. Third trip down to the Southern Ocean again, and then via South Africa, coming home in 1775. So lots of interactions with the natives. And what's good with Cook here is there are violent interactions, but on the whole, Cook is making friends. He can go back to these locations and friends and allies. He's actually respecting these people and trying to work with their customs. And fairly unusual for a European is he's like trying to deal with them more or less on their own terms and trying to have peaceful relations and not just looking down at them contemptuously or looking at them as someone to just invade or, oh my God, these people are weird, let's kill them, right? Far from perfect, but fascinating relationships that he evolves with these people, that a little bit of attempt to understand and respect a different culture goes a long way. But I'm leaving you to look in his journals to look at these interactions. If you go to the slide below that, I have the photographs of a chunk of ice, stormy sea, and a late 19th century photograph of a sailing ship covered in ice. Of course, Terra Australis wasn't there. And so you don't get the fame of discovering a new continent like other explorers did, or finding a trade route to Indian Ocean or something, because proving something's not there isn't particularly glorious. But it took an epic voyage of 3 different seasons of sailing all around the roaring 40s. You're basically down there in the ice. Even though it's summer, it's freezing, because you're as close as what we now call Antarctica as you can get without crashing your ship into the ice and sinking or getting frozen in. You're in a sailing ship, two sailing ships, thousands of miles away from anybody or anything. Anything goes wrong, you're dead. Okay, you're covered in ice. The waves break on the ship. It freezes. You have to get the crew out, and you have to break the ice off the rigging and the mast so it doesn't make the ship top heavy or break the mast. So you're chipping ice off the ship. You're constantly being sprayed with frozen water. Okay, it's stormy most of the time. You're dodging ice. How do you do that at night? You really have to sail very slowly at night. No Titanic here. It's like, we're going slow. No warning, right? Like I said, anything goes wrong, you're dead. And he spent 3 different seasons sailing as far south as he can go that was not going to get him stuck in the ice, but proving that there's no continent. Day in, day out, week in, week out, for several months each year, just sailing through frozen, stormy ocean. It's epic seamanship. They lost very few people. Again, keeping them healthy, keeping them protected. It's one of the most amazing feats of seamanship in history. 3 different seasons. And then going up and encountering the various Polynesian natives during the winter. One of the most epic voyages in history, as far as I'm concerned. That's my thing. And again, if the next slide, called Second Voyage, is the map of the voyage, and you can sort of see the line along the southern Indian Ocean, South Pacific, South Atlantic as he's doing the entire circle, and then you'll see the little loops up to Tahiti and so forth in the summer. Incredible voyage. Incredible. And it's so good that we get to the next slide, which is the third circumnavigation. The third circumnavigation. I'm going to do this as a separate video. This one's 22 minutes, and you can sort of grasp that, because the third one is where he dies in Hawaii, and we will sort of talk about this situation with the Polynesians in more detail. But let me do a separate video so you're not just watching one endless one.